Hello, it is spring 2020, and what a strange spring it is. If you're watching this sometime in the future, you may not realize how weird it is, but believe me, it's weird in spring of 2020. But it's time for a new anime season, and I'm going to bring my thoughts on that to you. Now, as usual, I've watched the first episode of each of the TV anime airing this season. However, I have skipped any seasons 2, seasons 3 stuff where I figure you're probably going to go back and watch it at the beginning if you really want to get into that franchise. You're not going to jump in season 4 of a particular series. And also no anime that's aimed at very young children, sort of Sesame Street level anime that we get occasionally. But let's go ahead and dive right in, starting with The Eighth Son. Excuse me. This is my workshop as well, in case you couldn't tell from all the wood back there. So occasionally there's dust. The Eighth Son, are you kidding me? This is an isekai anime series, and interestingly, we're getting fewer isekai series this season. Young man is reborn into a fantasy world where he finds out he is the eighth son of a noble family, and if you're not familiar in medieval society, the land typically went to the first son, maybe the second son. Beyond that, no chance. So he's going to have a really difficult time working in this sort of society and making things and finding his way in the world. One thing I appreciate is that it actually starts with much later in the storyline, once he's an adult and he's kind of established himself, and then flashes back to him as a young child. So you get a sense of where the show is going, which I think definitely helps a little bit. It's hard to tell from this first episode kind of what pacing we're going to get, if we're going to have a lot of time with him as this young kid figuring things out, kind of like Ascendance of a Bookworm, or if we're going to kind of move pretty quickly throughout the show. This is a pretty standard isekai series, I would say. Some fun fantasy elements, some magic, a little more grounded in terms of, again, it's that medieval economics of titles and so forth and so on. But again, pretty middle of the road, kind of an isekai series. Nothing that stood out to me like, oh, here we go again. I also appreciated that he has a reasonable relationship with his family. Like, they're not starting out with, oh, I hate you and I hate you and all that kind of stuff. It's relatively trope light thus far, at least in terms of his current situation. The folks he ends up with, who knows? But I liked it as kind of sort of a standard isekai fantasy series, which might go in some fun directions. Speaking of fun directions, Pare Ranman, available on Funimation, high budget anime series, actually set in America, although the first episode is mainly in Japan. It's basically a cross America road race anime, but focusing on some characters from Japan who end up going over to America in what appears to be the early 1900s. But this is a very over-the-top kind of a series. The technology, the cars they're using are clearly very ridiculous. And it's clearly just having a lot of fun with this. It's much more sort of wacky races kind of a thing, but in anime with a high animation budget. Also interesting for the fact that our main character, this red-haired guy, appears to be somewhere on the autism spectrum. And I'm very curious to see where they're kind of going with that character, whether that's intentional or I'm just reading into that. But definitely an unusual premise for an anime series, and a fun one to jump in and check out. Again, more action-adventure-y than a lot of other concepts out there, and just kind of weird and out there. Then there's Argonavis from Bang Dream. Definitely not very out there. This is an all CGI anime series about basically a boy band. What I liked about Argonavis, which I cannot find on any streaming service, is that it's clearly based on hot guys, kind of an anime series. It is about a bunch of young men deciding to form a band. There's no fantasy. There's no science fiction. There's no crazy concept thus far. It's pretty much just young men wanting to form a band. And I really liked that approach, that it's just very realistic. It's very serious. Obviously, there's some over-the-top comedy moments, that you often get in anime, where folks are, hitting each other up the head and, pratfall kind of stuff. But it's clearly meant to be more like a live-action concept just done in anime. The CGI is inexpensive. Like, it gets the job done, but it's not particularly great to look at. But I found myself, as I got into the show, one of those shows where I think if you get into the characters, that animation quality isn't really going to, you'll get used to it. It's just kind of their style. So if you're looking for hot guys forming a band, that's really what you got there. Interesting anime, this series, Arte. Speaking of grounded anime, this is about a young girl living in Renaissance Florence, actual Renaissance Florence, who decides to become an artist, and about her sort of trials and tribulations doing so. What I love about this series is, again, this is Renaissance Italy, Florence. There's no magic. It appears to be very, very historical. And the girl is facing this, the whole problem of, want to be an artist. People don't, obviously, who's going to respect a 14-year-old girl who wants to be an artist, right? It's a male-dominated profession. So there's obviously stuff around gender politics and such, but also following that path of art, something that at the time, even though that had a lot of respect in some ways, it still wasn't a respectable position for a lot of folks in society. If you were a noble's son or daughter, you would not, it would not go over well if you told your parents, I want to be an artist. That was something that other folks did, right? So interesting to explore that topic in this sort of way. Animation, again, pretty straightforward. It is 2D. No really crazily animated sequences in episode 1, but I think they are trying to keep it pretty realistic in that sense. You're not going to have folks leaping across bridges and things like that. There's not a lot of opportunity for high quality animated sequences, but I found myself really drawn in. I think they did a good job of establishing the character and her, not just her motivations, but her personality. The fact that she's not just an impetuous 14-year-old girl, she's not just, you understand kind of where she's coming from by the end of that first episode pretty well. And they've introduced some of the other characters too. So I liked it a lot, but it is definitely more of a slice of life, quiet series than some of these other ones. And a neat premise. Speaking of slice of life, Breakwater Club, anime series about high school girls at a fishing club. It is very much a sort of moe girls going to a club, but in this case, fishing. It is interesting how much of the episode does deal with fishing, and it does a good job of presenting fishing as being something that is kind of icky. It is kind of gross. There's a lot of stuff that you do when you're fishing that's a little ugh, especially to outsiders. But it can be very fun in and of its own way. So it is not presented from the perspective of an expert saying, oh yeah, it's great, and we're going to ignore all of the weirdnesses of it. But also they did make it something where by the end of the first episode, I was like, oh, I could definitely watch more of this. I can enjoy watching them enjoy this sport, and I can kind of get some of the appeal of it. Also, what I appreciate is there's no, move of God stuff in this. It's not sports anime, right? They're not going to go after the great fish of the sea or anything. It's just girls hanging out, fishing in a fishing town, basically, in Japan, modern Japan. So I like it a lot. Again, very much slice of life, relaxed, quiet. And I think this is going to be the relaxed slice of life anime series of the season if you just want to chill out with something this season. Definitely going for that. And a pretty nice budget. So, Bungo to Alchemist, Gears of Judgement. I love that title. This is a tough one because this is based on a browser game turned into a mobile game about Japanese authors who jump into novels to correct them because there are these evil creatures that are corrupting the stories of novels. And so they need to jump in and use magic powers from within the story to fix the story. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of authors in this franchise adapted into an anime series. So there's a lot of levels going on, especially in this first episode, as they kind of introduce you to this concept in this world. I did really enjoy it. It's obviously hot guys, so it's one of those things. But that's very incidental at this point. It is more of an anime series about the stories of literature and exploring those stories and kind of what happens in them and the themes of those stories. One of the things I found really fascinating is that basically it's how the characters have to kind of fulfill the theme of the story even if the plot diverges. So, you know, you may not be able to get to the original ending, but what ending you get to still has to serve the author's purpose in terms of, is the theme of the story about loss? Then there has to be loss at the ending. Right? You can't just have a big happy ending and then it's all taken care of. So that was a really interesting concept. Pretty high animation budget. The characters are somewhat inscrutable but interesting on that level. I think they balance that out with making some characters who seem to know everything but aren't truly annoying in that way. Although I can see some folks getting frustrated by that. But yeah, I certainly enjoyed that first episode. I was pulled along the threads of that. But it can be kind of overwhelming in terms of concept and what they're trying to do. So be aware of that. Like I said, it was pretty cool. Okay, now I have to talk about Digimon Adventure. And yes, this is technically an ongoing franchise, but it's a major reboot, and so I think it's worth exploring here. For those not familiar, this is a complete reimagining and remake of the original Digimon Adventure TV series, Season 1. So it's got the same characters. Character designs have been somewhat tweaked and updated. Animation quality has definitely been improved. And the plot has been reworked in the sense that it looks like it's going to follow the same basic outline, but they're not starting it out in the same spot, so forth. I was really, really impressed, and I've been a fan of Digimon in various ways for a long time. I hold this franchise in high regard, and I think they did an excellent job of figuring out how do we take these characters and these concepts and do them justice in a way that speaks to modern people, modern fans, and to be a little bit more, I guess, accessible for the modern audiences, where there's much more of a sense of urgency in this first episode. It is structured in such a way to help you understand what's going on a little bit more easily instead of just throwing you right in. I also really appreciate, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say, in the first episode focuses almost entirely on just two of the main kids. So the others show up briefly, but it's really just those two. They haven't really met any of the others yet. And what I like about that is it then, it gets you introduced to those characters in more detail. You start to care about those characters in more detail. Whereas before it's, here are a whole bunch of kids, and you kind of pick your favorite and see where it goes. I think there's a lot more potential for exploration of character and personality, and for character growth in this series. Also, nice animation budget. Interestingly, there's no transformation sequence this time. Who knows if that will continue? But yeah, I was definitely impressed. I think this hit all my right buttons, not just in terms of nostalgia, but in terms of rethinking this for a modern audience. I think they did a really good job there while keeping true to the spirit. So full marks there as far as I'm concerned. And just fun. You can watch that and just enjoy it, just for what it is. On the other hand, we have Gallon Dinosaur. This is sort of the Pop Team epic of this series. It definitely feels very inspired by Pop Team Epic. It is basically just sort of weird stuff happens, and we see weird things happening, and then suddenly we get a live action version of that, and then suddenly we get claymation sequences, and it's just kind of random. The humor is very random. A lot of long pauses. That style of humor. I will admit it really didn't work very much for me. Love that character design, by the way, but the actual approach and animation and so forth just felt it was trying very hard to be funny, and while that can work, it felt like it was. I don't mind when a series tries hard. I think trying hard is good. But in this case, there is a certain amount of... it is so high concept. It is being funny by not being funny. It's like if we just don't tell a joke for a long time, that will be funny in and of itself. It's that kind of stuff which sometimes works and sometimes kind of falls flat. And so, you know, you may like it, and that's totally cool. Just be aware it's a very specific kind of humor that it's going for. Very, very weird. Speaking of weird, Glepnir. So this is a kind of a survival horror anime series. I'm gonna try to avoid saying too much about Glepnir because I think it is one of those shows, especially a horror anime series. It's worth going in relatively blind. But I think the pacing really does build intensity. There's this interesting sort of realism to the character situation. So when strange things happen, they come in great relief to what's going on. Not relief in the sense of feeling good, but in the sense of contrast, right? Which I think is always it's always nice seeing a show think about contrast and the different elements. Contrasting things against themselves. There's also some nice revelation over the course of the first episode, things that aren't as they seem, in ways that aren't always done that way. That said, it's very grimdark. It's very edgelord. There's a lot of not just fan service, just like outright sexualizations of characters that feel, I don't want to say inappropriate, but feel like they're cramming an awful lot of that sort of sexual content, especially into episode 1. So much so that it felt unbalanced. It felt like, why do we have so much of this here? I don't know. And just combined with all of the sort of darkness and angst of a lot of what's going on, it felt very heavily loaded with all of those themes. So if it continues like that, it might kind of collapse under its own weight, or it might just be too much for someone to really get into, and to stay with. The trajectory, though, might change. We'll see. Definitely a high animation budget. One of those shows we'll definitely remember the show, the visuals, and so forth. Not every second of it, but you'll see this and you'll go, oh yeah, I remember that. Right. So worth checking out for that. Probably one of those shows that some people are gonna like really love and everyone else is just gonna completely pass on. One of those classic things. But definitely dark psychological horror kind of an anime series. The not that in any way, shape, or form is Kikuchi Go To, which is notable because there was a trailer drop for this, which kind of upended a lot of expectations around it. Basically, this little girl has a father who draws adult manga, we'll put it that way. And so you think, okay, that's going to be. But the trailer really made it look like a heartwarming family kind of anime. And the first episode, it's hard to tell. There's a lot of wacky gag manga kind of anime vibes to this. A lot of over the top reactions to things, people having getting into scrapes and trying to figure out how to get out of them, and somebody sees you over here but you're not supposed to be here, and so you have to make some big excuse, that kind of stuff, and very ridiculous. But there is this underlying theme of there's this this guy has this daughter and he does not want her to know what he does for a living, and him trying to protect her. And the fact that she is very sweet and nice, and that theme of family and their relationship. So I'm not sure how much they're going to actually explore that theme versus it's going to be this sort of running gag of him trying to hide his real job from his daughter. Can't quite tell, but there are definitely scenes in there that make it feel like this could turn into just straight up family drama. We'll see. I'm curious to see where they go with that. The first episode definitely did intrigue me, and it was funny. Like, I laughed at it. Then there's Listeners, sort of a throwback anime. This feels very Eureka 7. It's a mecha anime set in a world where the main character is a garbage collector on a very Battle Angel Alita style situation. Picking up trash that's dumped on them, that kind of thing. And he stumbles on this girl, that one there, who can pilot a giant mecha, basically, but it's all, like, audio-based. So like she has like literally a jack in her spine that you can plug a thing into, and the mecha takes the form of a like an amp that then transforms into a mecha. Um, there is an a ridiculousness to it that is clearly very intentional stylistically. Ridiculous not in the sense of goofy comedy, although there is comedy there, but just in the sense of the basic concept, you know, a girl with an audio jack in her back. But the style is much more realistic, much more like Gundam or Macross in terms of the animation style. So that's a really interesting contrast. Definitely some a lot of attention paid to like character animation. Not a lot of mecha animation in the first episode, so still we're gonna see how that goes. Definitely very Trigger-esque in its concept. So you think of a Studio Trigger anime, again, sort of a Gurren Lagann, Darling in the Franxx, that sort of vibe for kind of world building and concepts where it can be kind of over the top at times in some of its concepts and some of its world building. But underneath that is some serious stuff around what a character wants and expectations and character development, that kind of stuff, right? So if that's your thing, this will definitely be your thing. It feels like, again, very classic mecha kind of an anime series. Then there's Mucal Dreamy. This is, again, not streaming anywhere that I can tell. This is a magical girl series by Sanrio, makers of Hello Kitty. If you can imagine the makers of Hello Kitty making a magical girl series, that's exactly what the show is. It is very cute. It is pink and pastel, and the characters are all adorable, and their companion characters are all like literally stuffed animals. Like they're literally full of like padding. Yeah, it is very much that. It is a cute magical girl series about magical stuffed animals and all that stuff. If you're into that, this will be great. It appears to be very much that. Again, high animation budget, actually. But that is all it is. Like, it is very much inside that box. So you're going to get Magical Girl series from the makers of Hello Kitty out of that. Moving on to Millionaire Detective Balance Unlimited. So obviously sort of a Sherlock vibe to this anime series, and actually James Bond vibe as well. Some of the imagery is directly James Bond like. Basically, you have a hard-headed police detective, and he is joined by a guy who is clearly very wealthy and solves all of his problems with money. In some cases, in very, very over-the-top ways. And that is clearly the running gag, that he has this ability to just, cause things to happen because he just pays for them. And so he can cause massive property damage and all this, and it doesn't matter. They're clearly going for a big Hollywood action movie vibe with the anime series. Be aware there's a lot of CGI going on. All the main characters are all 2D. There's some mismatch in that over the course of the series. This is one of those series that feels like it's trying to do a lot with its premise, and sometimes it throws so much at you that those pieces don't quite mesh incredibly well. But it's also episode 1, right? So sometimes that just happens. If that concept sounds fun to you, I think Millionaire Detective definitely delivers on that, kind of, again, sort of action movie vibe, Dirty Harry feel. Also Sherlock / James Bond. But I can see it being one of those series that's going to inspire some memes of certain animation sequences where people are like, wow, like things went really wonky there. But also a series that some people are just going to like really, really enjoy and just really have fun with just because of the big action in it, right? So, hey. Definitely going for that vibe. And we don't get a lot of those, so that's nice. Moving on to My Next Life as a Villainous, All Routes Lead to Doom. I will have to kind of spoil the premise of this anime series a little bit, so if that worries you, go ahead and skip to the next image you see there on the side. Basically, the main character is a nobleman's daughter in a fantasy world. Although I don't think there's any magic. No, there's magic. I think. Anyway, and she realizes that she died and is now in not technically an isekai. She actually is reborn into her favorite visual novel, which is a dating sim game about a girl surrounded by hot guys. It's a Tome game. But she has been reborn as the Villainous, as the girl who's always, right? That girl. That is who she is, and she's now on that route, basically. But it's like years before she meets up with the protagonist as a teenager. And the problem is the protagonist realizes that, like, every single and like all of the good endings of the game result in her death. Well, all the bad, well, all of the no, yeah, yeah. Well, all the bad endings, she like at least gets exiled. Like it's bad for her, but at least she lives, right? So she now has to kind of figure out how to reroute and not do doom flags, not trigger doom flags, and how to kind of rewrite the story from inside it so that she has a reasonably good ending. But as you can imagine, everything she tries to do then has consequences and sometimes don't work out the way she wants to. What I really appreciated about the first episode is that, and again, I hope this isn't a spoiler that will ruin it for you. They set out very quickly that is possible. Like this isn't going to be a series in which she is following the plot exactly until the very end, and then you get to see what happens. She is already changing aspects of that story, but it's just a question of whether it's going to be a different story. Once she actually gets to the main Otome game story, but she may still be in sort of the same situation, or she may now be sort of a different kind of antagonistic character. She's not going to be the wealthy evil girl, but she may be something else. So I think that is a really good way of playing it, where I'm not just feeling like I'm following the story as it should be, and she's just constantly getting thwarted. She's going to be able to make progression. That's the thing. If this was just, you will have no way of really changing anything until maybe the end, that gets frustrating. But knowing that she is going to be influencing the story, it's just how, right? And what are the results of that? I think that's cool, especially because then you can start thinking about, okay, what is the logic of a visual novel, right? Given this new playing field, where does everyone fit in? What are you now in that trope, basically? So I liked it. Pretty good animation quality. Definitely some fun humor, good pacing of the humor as well, and revealing of things. So definitely a fun one. Also fun, Shachibato, President, It's Time for Battle. This is not an isekai series, but set in a fantasy world, but a very sort of a mishmash fantasy world. So there are characters wandering around in like medieval clothes, and others wandering around in like a suit jacket and a tie, right? But in the world, there are basically adventuring parties that go out, and the main character is more or less roped into running one of these adventuring parties. So he is technically leading the adventure party, but he's also kind of managing it, organizing, and kind of the president of the company, if you will. So I'm unclear whether this series is going to be basically, hey, this is kind of what business is like, because there's definitely a business vibe to the whole concept. He is the president. They have like dues. One of the characters is the secretary, although she's also like a spellcaster. I think she's a cleric. So I'm not sure what that is trying to do, but I think Shachibato is. I had a really good time with it. It was a fun comedy, monster slaying kind of a series. I'm just curious as to whether it's going to be sort of about here's how to run a business or not. That'd be a neat twist on the basic concept. You do have, the protagonist is kind of constantly flailing around and over his head and kind of pulled around by various girls. But, I mean, that is a pretty classic moe harem trope. So, it's that. There's no, like, strong harem vibes out of this yet. It's just, guys surrounded by cute girls at this point. Speaking of which, Princess Connect Redive. A more traditional harem anime at this point. a guy loses his memories, girl shows up to help him and kind of guide him through and do things, and he makes various companions along the way. What I liked about this is it had a pretty high animation budget. The characters are pretty tropey, but they do a good job for me of establishing personalities within that tropes, where like the silver-haired girl is the silver-haired girl. She's quiet and kind of timid, but she can kind of kick ass when she needs to. All those things. But there are some twists on that I found kind of nice. The brown-haired girl with the ahoge is the girl with the ahoge. You know, she's kind of dumb and she's constantly getting into scrapes, but she's very energetic and she's very fun-loving. And what I liked is that she's kind of forgetful and boisterous and so forth in a way that still keeps the plot moving forward. She's not dragging the story down. She's actually kind of helping things happen because of what she stumbles across, because of how she can deal with problems in her own very unique way. So I'm hopeful that they are establishing a set of characters that bounce off each other nicely, and that form a party that contrasts with each other well. Contrasting is kind of my theme for this season. Also, theme for this season seems to be just straight fantasy. Most of the anime series this year that you think would be isekai are actually just fantasy series. Like he did not, come here from another world as far as we can tell. It's just he's here with these girls and going around. So again, if you like kind of the moe harem thing, definitely kind of that going on. And I like that. Also nice because it's a little more laid back. It's a little bit more, not quite slice of life, but more just the story of these adventurers going around doing their thing. But like, there's not a lot of, doesn't seem to be a lot of big action stuff. More of like a road trip vibe. I also checked out the first episode of Shadowverse, which is based on a trading card game. One of these, hugely popular trading card games, Yu-Gi-Oh, Card Fight, all those sorts of things. And it's very much that, right? It is the Yu-Gi-Oh collectible card game, trading card game, trope, concept, all down the line. All the tropes are there, all the characters are there, all the concepts are there, all of the, oh my gosh, he used that card. It's all there. It's actually so there. It's so cranked up, not quite to 11, but it's so on the nose, it almost felt like a parody. And I think you could actually enjoy this series just for playing sort of anime trope bingo. So just be aware of that, or at least, shonen card game bingo, if you will. So yeah, just be aware of that if you're going into it. Definitely more of a show for the younger crowd, I would say, though. There's a new Asakura Tyson anime this season. When I say new Asakura Tyson, this franchise has been around for decades, actually. There was a very well-regarded Sakura Wars OVA back in the 90s. And it's been around in bits in various places. I believe it started as a visual novel series, or at least a video game franchise. And so this is a new series in the franchise, new characters involved. Be aware it is all CGI characters, and this feels like the show where they're going to have the budget to pull that off. But there's a lot of things in this first episode where that just didn't quite feel right. They just didn't quite have the budget to kind of make it mesh with the backgrounds and make it and give the characters the emotive performances that they needed. It felt just a little bit like expressions plastered onto CGI faces as opposed to characters. Just for me. Again, I do think they'll be able to get that working. And there are definitely some characters and some moments where it worked. But a little rough for that first episode, FYI. Doesn't help the fact that they're basically introducing all of the concepts of Sakura Tyson in the first episode. So you get, the fact that they're in this sort of stage play thing, and there are these monsters that attack, and there are these sort of clockwork mecha things, and there's a lot going on in the world of Sakura Tyson. To get folks up to speed with, and this episode tries to do kind of all of that in 22 minutes. So be aware of that. I think it's a show that can come together, that has the potential. I didn't end it and think, oh well, that was a shame. But just be aware that it has some room for growth. having a difficult time pegging this anime series. Seeing Yesterday for me, um, very realistic, very grounded. It actually seems to be set in the 90s. And interestingly, the animation style is very 90s. And by that, I mean, like, they've clearly applied some filters and some stuff to where, like, the ink lines are rough. Not like 101 Dalmatians rough, but like, a pen as opposed to a, computer inking. Um, all the character designs are kind of not wild. They are more realistic in the way that some 90s anime could be, let's not go too crazy. Let's be more our normal experiences. As you can see from this artwork, like that is what the characters, those are the main characters in this first episode. And it appears to be sort of young people dealing with romance. Um, and I'm again not quite sure how to peg this. It's clearly not shonen. It's clearly not shojo. It's seinen, but it's more like young adult life seinen. It's I work in a convenience store because I haven't gotten a job yet. Seinen, dealing with young adulthood, and I'm very intrigued by that. I really liked the fact that it wasn't flashy. There was nothing supernatural, although I was waiting. There were a few moments where I was like, nothing's gonna happen here. But no, I really liked this show. It felt serious. It felt like it was trying to do a very particular thing, and very much succeeding at that. But again, one of those shows that I think some folks are gonna like, other folks just aren't gonna bounce off of. Kind of similarly, Tamayomi, the baseball anime of the season, in this case, girls baseball. What I saw definitely achieved all the things you want from the first episode of a baseball anime. Who is the unusually gifted, protagonist? What is the team that is at the bottom of their rankings or in trouble? How can the protagonist give them a chance at nationals, championships, whatever? And what is kind of the core relationship map, right? Who hates who gave up on the sport years ago, who has a huge passion for it but hasn't been able to really, make it happen yet, all that stuff, right? And Tamayomi does do that, but it is every sports anime ever, right? Like all of those things are here. It does not appear to be varying from that at all. And I'm not saying that as a complaint. It is that pattern, right, that we expect at a sports anime. It is delivering on that. So that's what you're in for. I think Tamayomi will absolutely deliver on that thing. Then there's Tower of God. A lot of buzz around Tower of God this season, and this is a hard one for me to talk about because I've been trying to sort through my feelings on Tower of God. I watched it, and I think I was a little oversold on the series because it definitely has a distinctive visual style. As you can see, like it doesn't have a lot of shiny hair and things like that. More flat, more dark colors and things in it, which I quite liked. Again, sort of a flashback to sort of 80s, 90s style character designs and such. But it is very shonen. It's very much sort of a battle royale-esque, or more of a, we have to get from here to there and battle all of the obstacles between us and them, or us and there to get there, and at the end we get the thing. And it's very much more it's very much more Ruby-esque, right? We have a bunch of weird characters with weird powers. Not weird characters, but distinctive characters with weird powers. That are very much contrasting with each other, and different factions all working with each other, and a lot of just strange mystery that's not explained in the first episode. That said, I find that to be, again, very sort of classically shonen tropey. Not like necessarily Dragon Ball Z, but you definitely see shows in the past that have done this kind of thing before. And there's not enough in this episode to really tell us how much they're going to deliver on that. Whether it's just going to be sort of shonen tropes the whole time, whether it's going to be, there's mystery, and then it never gets explained, right? There's a lot unanswered for me about Tower of God before I come down and say, this is the greatest anime ever. But I do think it's one of those anime series where, again, if you're looking for a slightly more angsty, a slightly more psychological shonen series, a series that is more dark, that is more a little more edgy, if you will, than your typical, you know, One Piece, right? That's really what Tower of God is going for. But again, we're introduced to so many different characters. It's kind of hard to tell where it's going. It's also one of those series where it's like, what's the power level? Like, I can't really tell what's impressive in this franchise yet. I can't tell who's really powerful because I don't know what that is relative to sort of everyone else. So we'll have to see how that goes and whether it's just kind of, he succeeds, he wins because he was somehow able to be more powerful than that other person because he had the will. I don't know, right? So, um, definitely though, kind of out there. Speaking of out there, Wave, listen to me. This is an anime series about a young woman, or actually like a young woman. I think she's around 30, who works at a radio station, and does a very oddball radio program that she does herself. It's an odd one because it very much plays with the fact that if you listen to a radio program and you like close your eyes, you can be pulled into that reality. They can weave a world around them that you can kind of get sucked into in a weird way in radio, and that is portrayed graphically, where she will describe herself out in nature, and suddenly she will be out in nature, even though she is technically in a booth somewhere doing this on the radio program. Kind of like the earlier one, Say Welcome, this one, or Say Yesterday, whatever. This feels like it's dealing more with adults and adult problems. It feels more experimental, even though the character designs are pretty traditional. The visual approach is not really weird in and of like camera angles and such, but it is playing around with reality in pretty fundamental ways. So an interesting one, an odd one, and one that definitely caught my attention. And that is it. Those are the anime series that I watched this season and checked out. I hope this was useful, reasonably so. Again, I try not to say this show was, top 10 or anything, because who knows. But hopefully this gives you some idea of what you might or might not like and what kind of, what might work for you. So that's it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.